Illustrious.
The Explorers Club.
Was so good that as an archivist, and she really ran it well. She had everything at her fingertips.
Yes.
And what they didn't realise, if they got rid of her, then they'd lose the right for holding as being. We had to have a registered archivist.
Yeah.
It's such a shame.
So it's all gone down to Woking, has it, Surrey History Centre?
Well, I think it's gone to Kingston, not Kingston, to Surrey, wherever it's gone.
Woking. Surrey History Centre in Woking, I think. Yes.
Right. Can we get on with this now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
That was amazing.
Yes, it was a bit of a coincidence. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, shut up, you. Ramadan, I would just like to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm really excited about this. I've been following your posts, and we were just having a little chat before I let everyone in about some of the weird and wonderful things that you've discovered, especially during your Kingdom of the Mummies TV show. So I'll hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me share the screen first. Get that going. So I don't know. I skip the introduction and I thank you because I have so much to say, and my presentations are always long. But I really would like to thank Sarah for giving me the opportunity to connect to a wider group now after the Kingdom of the Mummies have been on the air and people saw it. I was just wondering what kind of format we're going to have and what I should be talking about. So I prepared a presentation that I wanted to show you my journey with that area in Saqqara, where it started with pyramid text interest, and then all of the way, the interest in the pyramid text still there. But now we're getting into a complete different side of Saqqara that we will explore. Luckily for me, we're still within the same time period, that is Dynasty 26. So my interest in Saqqara started when I was at Brown University in the US, because I wanted to do pyramid texts. I wanted to write a dissertation on the revivals of the pyramid text in Dynasty 26. Not just writing on the Old Kingdom or the Middle Kingdom copies of the pyramid text, but just going all the way to the Dynasty 26 when they revived this literature. So I wanted to study this text that is in Saqqara, Abu Sir, and Heliopolis, all those Saite period tombs. So to give you an idea about these tombs, so they already exist from the late 1800s, when we have explorations of Saqqara, when they found those tombs of Dynasty 26. So in 1899, Maspero excavated the area around the Pyramid of Unas. He discovered Chanhibu, Samtik, and Padinisit, and then moved to the east. He found Padinit and Hekamsa. All five of them 4 out of these 5 are military commanders. So we have pretty much an area dominated with those high-ranking military officers. So then comes in the 40s, an Egyptian discovered Amuntayefnacht, who's also a military commander. Around the pyramid of Userkaf, the French discovered Nef-Ibra Sanit and Heru. Then Lepsius in the mid-1800s came and documented 2 important tombs, something Nebehti, Heru'a, and we don't know exactly where they are because they were completely backfilled in, this is one of my dreams, to go back to the area of Titi and try to locate these tombs again, because they do have permit text copies as well. Then before that, in the mid-1800s as well, Darcy has discovered Psamtik, this very famous tomb where we have this statue of a cow that is made of basalt. Also, he also has permit text and coffin text copies. So my interest is pretty much to go collect the text from all these tombs and try to study them, the ones in Abu Sir as well, and also the Heliopolitan Cemetery. But of course, I wanted to have an approach to the study of Egyptian texts. By the time it was over 165 years that Egyptologists started looking at text in general. So I wanted to see how philologists would really look at text. It took me about 1.5 years to decide on the approach. Should I do the old thing that we do in philology, you know, read, translate, make a commentary, or present the text in a complete different way, or look at the important thing that is the transmission of the text from the Old Kingdom all the way to Dynasty 26. Then comes the big questions of transmission. Is about the mechanism where they were actually copying directly from an old monument, or there was an archive that they have to go to, consult, and start copying the text. The copying mistakes, the stomata, which is the genealogical tree of all these texts. This is beautiful things to talk about. But after 165 years of doing Egyptology in text in general, I was thinking, okay, should we really rethink the approach? Should we do something else? And that was the beginning of my journey with these texts. I decided for some reason to look at how they laid out the text on these walls. And after that, I went into a completely different direction as well. But to give you an idea about these tombs and the text, where the texts are, every tomb from Dynasty 26 in the Memphis cemetery starts with this huge shaft, sometimes 10 by 10, and it goes 30 meters deep. And in the bottom of this shaft, you would have a 1 burial chamber. But every burial chamber is lit to by side shafts. As in the case of Amuntayefnacht, you have 3 side shafts that all lead to a corridor, and then you go into the burial chamber. And the burial chamber, every single one in the Memphis cemetery looks like this. The size could be different, of course, but it is more of a monumental sarcophagus. And the text around in the walls is pretty much laid out the same way the Middle Kingdom coffin text were laid out inside the wooden coffins. So you would see text that are connected with everything that has to do with the head is back at the head side, and then text that is connected with the presentations of offering is to the right hand side of the deceased. Text that has to do with the resurrection of the deceased will be the left hand side of the deceased, and then the foot end with everything that has to do with making the feet of the deceased firm in the afterlife and allowing the deceased to go out. Those are pretty much the general grammar of text disposition in the Middle Kingdom that traveled all the way to the Memphite Saite cemeteries. Different when it goes down to the south. In Asasif, they have a completely different grammar. So to make these things very short, we knew about these tombs, all of them, since they were pretty much, we have excavation reports. And in fact, the first issue of the analysis of these has the reports of two important tombs, that is Psamtik and Padinisit. And they were published by Maspero, of course. We discovered them. Interesting thing is just his way of documentation. That's the documentation of the time, the 2D documentation, turning the physical reality that is 3D into 2D format, just using this interesting, very straightforward, unrealistic lines of walls. And there's not really the time to talk about how is it different documentation in the early 1800s and documentation in the 21st century when we use 3D documentation. We had to go to the site and re-excavate everything because Maspero backfilled all the shafts, and the entire site had these mounds of debris, sometimes 5 and 6 meter high of debris around on top of these tombs. So I needed to clean the entire area, and this is where we started re-excavating the shaft of Padinisit. And this is after our clearance, the main shaft of Padinisit and everything, the shaft of Psamtik and Chanihibu as well. So we re-excavated the site after it was left for almost 117 years. And this is where Maspero stopped. Sorry, this is here where Maspero stopped, the chapel of Padinisit and the site shaft. Then he left the site. We discovered our mummification complex right here. This is the first shaft, and then the rest of the complex come out here. So less than 1 meter where Maspero stopped, to the south of where Maspero stopped, we started to discover our embalming complex from Dynasty 26. The area becoming really, really interesting. So just to go back, this is how we did our 3D documentation, the laser scanning of all the tombs that Maspero excavated in 1899. Padinisit, Psamtik, and Chanihibu. So this is the result of our laser scan and photogrammetry together, of course. So important thing about our 3D documentation is that very, very accurate, and you can do it very fast. We combine both laser scanning and photogrammetry together. And this is the burial chamber of Padinisit, the side shaft, and the corridor leading into it. And this is how this particular model, we can manipulate, we can turn it around, we can do everything on the computer. And even you can, in AutoCAD, you slice through it, and then you get your interesting profile and elevation here with this very, very high precision of measurement. So this is the burial chamber of Psamtik, and one of the things we wanted to do is also to conserve these tombs because they were open for the public until I think 1996, and then they were closed. So they suffered a lot, and they were really in bad shape. Salt crystallization, dirt accumulating on the walls, and flaking off the inscribed surfaces and everything. So this photograph is from 2010 when I was in the Ministry of Antiquities. But after that, I left the project and I went back to it in 2016 to do it. So wanted to do to reduce level of humidity and also control ventilation. So we had to create and to transform this side shaft into a natural air shaft that becoming sort of more of a natural ventilation system, reduces humidity and also control temperature down there. So, and of course, this is some of the walls when we started cleaning them. This is how they look. And after the first stage of cleaning, we only wanted to clean the background of the inscriptions using a solution of distilled water and alcohol. And this is how the results of these things. As I said, it's pretty simple approach to conservation that is minimal intervention, and it requires a lot of patience and dedication, of course, before that the skills and the ability to work in a very delicate situation like this. And this is all done by a very young Egyptian conservation team that I formed and I put together. And this is the result of our conservation of the burial chamber of Padinisit. So Padinisit was published by Maspero in this very standardized hieroglyphic fonts that were created for the IFAU, the French Institute, and also for the Analysis series. They use a typeset technique, typeset printing technique of the time, which means every hieroglyph is pretty much, as you could see, it's devoid of details. They have this black silhouettes. So that's a standard form. So for somebody in the 21st century who wants to study, for example, paleography, which is the evolution of the shapes of a single hieroglyph, would not be able to really work with the old publications. And also somebody who wants to do a study on the orthography, how they spelled, how they arranged word together, they not going to be able to do that, because in reality, this reproduction by mass brew is a transmitted form of the text that is on the wall. So it's pretty much, for me, as somebody who wants to study this text on this wall, for example, is a completely different situation when I have to deal with this one. These are two different physical realities. So this is one approach that I have to do, text on the walls versus reproduction by early Egyptologists. And believe me, it makes a huge difference. So I wanted to do some digital documentation, digital tracing. So we combine digital photographs with photogrammetry and of course, digital tracing and inking. So this is in the process of creating our 3D photographs for the entire wall. Every frame, every yellow frame here is the position of the camera. We take overlaps of sometimes about 45% overlap. Sometimes it could go up to 60% overlaps. So every yellow frame here is pretty much the position of our camera when we were shooting. We take all these photographs, we'll process them, then we'll put them in the AgiaSoft program. It puts them together and creates what we know as the mesh, as you could see here. And you could see there's the hieroglyphs right here. But what you see here, this is the other sort of advancement in our technique, is that we have the model as a mesh, but it's not as a space with real measurements. So we had to do stickers on the walls, and every sticker has a number. And every sticker has been plotted by our total station, which means this is becoming a control point in order to assure accurate measurements. So if you don't have total station, you can measure the distance between these 2 points with your measuring tape, no problem, but you're not gonna get the precision you would get from a total station. And when you have this mesh, this entire model on your AutoCAD, you feed the AutoCAD with the coordinates of all these points, and all of a sudden you have the exact space of this model. So you have exactly this wall, same measurements as in reality, and every hieroglyph on the wall has the same exact measurements as in reality. So this is one of the things, and this is the result of our photogrammetric model that we produce. We could take this beautiful photograph, put it on Illustrator as JPEG, and start tracing. But we don't do it. We do something different. And at the end, we stitch everything together, of course. And this is the first result that we have of our digital photography, digital tracing, and digital epigraphy. But the interesting thing is that I could take this nice photogrammetric model. As a text person, I can do so much. Now, I can play a lot. I want to divide up the wall and the text according to genre. I see different, because I want to know how the Egyptians really laid out a wall, and then what kind of text went where. You try to get into the mind of the editor and the person who actually executed this entire inscription on the walls. So dividing up imagine with me that an editor comes and tells the scribe, okay, I need you to divide this entire medium of transcription into panels. And every panel has this measurements, and every panel has the many number of column, and there you put this, and here you put that. So this is a very interesting thing that I wanted to reconstruct, really. That dialogue between the text person and the scribe. Do I fancy this situation? No, I don't. It's actually happening. I've written an article about text transmission, and one of the things that I wanted to say is that we are not looking at this small transmission moment between the person who knows the text and composed everything and the person who put it on the walls. Do we have evidence for this particular moment and interaction? Yes. In the tomb of Nachtmen in Thebes, in the burial shaft of this tomb, there was a huge number of ostraca that has portions of Book of the Dead and text. When you look at this ostraca corpus, every text on it is actually the text that is on the walls of the burial chamber of Nachtmen. So it looks to me like those were the source from which the person who put the text on the wall was copying. And there's so many differences in terms of spelling and also the shapes of the hieroglyphs between what is on the ostraca and what is on the walls. So for me, it was this idea of somebody is giving this ostraca to the scribe and tell them, put them on the walls. Am I stretching this? No. Because also in the tomb of Amenhotep, we have an ostraca that was published by Pierre Telly. The ostracon has exactly about 5 lines or three columns, I guess. And the first 2 columns has a portion, the beginning of the seventh section of the text of the duties of the vizier. And toward the end of the last column, that's the 3rd column, the person wrote one notation. He said, for 12 columns in that portion. So 12 columns means for him is that you start this text, the 7th section of the duties of the vizier, and should run 12 columns on the walls. And it's actually that numbers on the walls. So what it tells me that there is a communication between a text person who composes the text and the person who's going to put the text on the walls. So I wanted to do this, figuring out how they lay out the text, how they divide up the medium of transcription, what kind of text goes there. So for example, in Padinisit, you have these interesting panels here, one for the offering list, and then comes the green one here for the offering, the permatext offering spells. We're talking about a tomb from Dynasty 26, but yes, they have copies of the permatext that appeared for the first time in the reign of King Unas. Then comes here serpent spells. Then comes royal regalia and weapons spells. And this is very interesting because they appear in the time of Queen Neat. They disappear by the end of Dynasty 6, and then they come back in the first intermediate period for once, and then they disappear completely, but they come back in Dynasty 26 only one time with Padinisit. If you have a question, I'll tell you why. And then comes serpent spells, then comes transformation permatext spells, and more of regalia plus protection spells, the serpent spells, and then transformation spells, then another transformation spell. So if you're thinking about text and you're taking the word text literally, it means fabric. You're creating a texture. And imagine every theme here is a thread with a color. So this is your cloak of many colors right here. This is the number of threads that you're using to produce this fabric. Any person could use the same spells, but they arrange them differently. Then you get a complete different fabric, you complete different composition. So you move to the other wall, the opposite wall in Padinisit, that's the western wall, and this is our tracing. And then they come here, same exact text, but arranged differently. And then you get a completely different arrangements of the color because the themes has been arranged differently, but it's the same exact composition. Then the head end has this beautiful text about presentations of different oils, the sacred 7 oils, the linens, and also the necklaces, anything that has to do with the head. should go behind the head of the deceased, of course. And then comes the exit wall, this one here, which pretty much coffin text spells, predominantly coffin text spells, except for these two right here at the entrance, at the door jambs, the exit. It's the very important ferryman spell from the permit text. This is 270, and this is very, very important. Then comes everything here. The coffin text spells on the walls here is about making the feet of the deceased firm in the afterlife, and also allowing the deceased to go through, first to open the gate of the tomb and allow the deceased an exit. So yes, very interesting. Then I wanted to do something else completely, except this layout on how the grammar of text disposition, and get into how the Egyptians really compose text. Then I had to start thinking about this interesting idea about Michael Bakhtin when he was talking about dialogism and intertextuality, how old texts come from older texts. And I looked at the work of this very brilliant lady, Yulia Kristeva. She's Bulgarian, but she's French as well. And she's pretty much the person who picked up his theory and introduced it to the academic world in French literature, and told us something about his idea of intertextuality, because he was saying a textual work does not simply exist, but is generated in relation to another textual work, which means if I want to look at the text of Padinisit, I will have similarities and something major commonalities in the text of Psamtik, in the text of Unas, in the text of Titi, in the text of Pippi. All of them will have to share things because they all building their text the same way. So, and they rely on the same exact number of spells, but every single one produces a completely different composition. So, and he says, and as such, a text is an intersection of multiple textual surfaces. So any person who's writing something, he really needs to bring older ideas, modern ideas, his or her own ideas, and produces something new. And this is not very new, because Plato has said something similar, that we all swim in the same pool of knowledge, and everyone draws out of this knowledge as much as they want, and they feed it back with the production of knowledge they have. So it's a very interesting idea. Same for any person who writes text. Her idea, Yulia Kristeva's idea about text, she's saying any text is constructed as a mosaic of quotations. Any text is the absorption and transformation of another. So this is saying, if you want to compose a text, you really have to absorb other texts and then produce more of them. This was very interesting to look at Egyptian religious texts in that way, because if you imagine, you have a very busy production line of coffins, for example, in a workshop, and a text person has to sit down and make sure they fit in as many texts as they want in one medium of transcription, that is the wooden planks of this coffin. So what's going on in their heads? They're using older texts. They can compose new text and put it together. So Libriano, of course, you can't have this interesting dialogue happening out in literature, happening outside of Egyptology, and Libriano not having a say in it. And he was always saying also intertextuality, concept that implies that a text is never a truly original creation of its author, but a part of a dynamic universe of texts with which it dialectically interrelates. And this is what, it's perfect when you look at how the text editors in ancient Egypt produced all these fantastic text materials on different medium of transcription, either wooden coffins, either stelae, inside pyramids, inside tombs. Those guys have a stock material they're working with, and also they have to compile new text material. Then, of course, this is also something that has been discussed a lot, intertextuality in anthropology as well. as a philological perspective conceives of text essentially as cultural object, durable, repeatable, classifiable, and linked to other texts by relations of descent and generic similarities. This is also very, very true for Egyptian texts and all these tombs together. So you can look at ancient texts in general, and this is what I like about ancient texts. If we understand it, they're often corporate literatures. We don't have an author of these texts. This is the basic thing. The issue of authorship, we don't have it in ancient Egypt. We don't know who compiled these texts, but it is a textual heritage that belong to everybody. And if you have the knowledge of it, you can draw out of this text reservoir as much as you can. And also in the new composition, you can feed it with whatever you have compiled newly. Often evolved over centuries, and this is the big thing about ancient literature, and compositions consist mostly of shared textual materials, perfectly suits ancient Egyptian texts. And if we want to look at it this way, we will find that texts were merged together also from ancient Egypt, and they were often traditions integrated, alluded to, and adopted. This is just very quickly some of the ideas, and of course, it goes on to classify what is intertextuality and what forms of intertextuality in terms of rewriting, retelling, reworking, continuation of earlier text, borrowing, quotation, and believe it or not, plagiarism is part of intertextuality, but it's not the good part of it. So out of text problems and things. But we go back to these tombs and we go look at what we found right next to these tombs, and that would be, as I mentioned earlier, this is where Maspero stopped in his excavations exactly in January 1900. And in, I think in April 2016, we discovered this shaft, but we did not excavate it because we needed a permission from the Ministry of Antiquities. And we waited until November, or no, I think November 2016, when we went back to excavate this particular shaft. Everything here was covered up, a mound of about 6 meter high debris. So we started going down this shaft. This is how we discovered it. And then it led us down 30 meters deep into this big, huge room, and with this interesting tunnel up here, and it starts here and it goes down here. This is the Second Dynasty galleries, those underground tunnels, huge city undergrounds. Saqqara has 3 networks of those galleries. They all belong to the last 3 kings of Dynasty 2. But this room is about 5 meters by 9 meters and has this very interesting, deposit of pottery. Those cups and bowls and vessels, amphorae, everything, even imported vessels. But the important thing about this corpus of pottery is that it is inscribed to names of oils, substance of mummification, and also some instructions as to what can we use. Here, for example, ut hares, which means embalm or wrap with it. Whatever in this cup should be used in the wrapping process. And this is an interesting thing because you have a gold mine of information now, a perfect project for residue analysis, chemical residue analysis. So we can know exactly what was in this cup. And then this is another interesting cup, which is saying ut, embalming or wrapping. Here should be the day, during the day, and 34. So whatever was in this cup used during day 34. And then here is one thing, sethage is one of the sacred 7 oils, and antiu, which is, we always thought antiu is a mirror. So you got this interesting thing is that you have the labels for everything on those bowls and cups and even the vessels. So you could do your residue analysis, and now you have this fantastic opportunity to really know exactly what the Egyptians use in terms of oils and resins. In terms of dating, for somebody who loves text, this is fantastic. This one and this one in particular, because this one is cursive hieroglyph, but this number is written in Demotic. So you get cursive hieroglyph and Demotic in the same line, and here is the same thing. You get Sifich written in Demotic, but even this jar and NTU is written in cursive hieroglyph or hieratic. This is a very interesting chronological anchor, because it is what we know as proto-Demotic. So it's an interesting dating criterion. So we are very sure that this is proto-Demotic, which is started mid-Dynasty 26. That's the transition from cursive hieroglyph or hieratic into Demotic, and in between, of course, was abnormal hieratic. So for somebody who wants to know exactly the date of this particular complex, we have a very good and a solid evidence for proto-Demotic that is mid-Dynasty 26 and continued all the way, possibly beginning Dynasty 27. So back in this room, this huge room with the ledge and its simple drainage system and this huge industrial capacity fumigation source, this vessel right here. And then this is just an interesting screenshot I have from the Kingdom of the Mummies that shows the 3D documentation we had, the shaft going down, the Second Dynasty galleries, and the embalming workshop, the Wabit underground. And then above ground, this is a photogrammetric model of the rectangular space here, what I called it Ibu-like structure, because it has the layout of the Old Kingdom tent of purification, the Ibu. But I don't think any kind of purification would happen here, but it's more another treatment of the body, and possibly with salt right here, and preparation of the linen was right here. But the interesting part was this particular shaft here, this K24, this huge one. The very fact it is within this precinct right here gives it a huge spatial and functional association to everything happening here and happening down here. That is the embalming complex here. If you go down, this is one of the photographs that I love very much from National Geographic. They took BBC Studios, the production company, took our 3D documentation, laser scanning and photogrammetry and everything, and we hired a graphic company that puts everything together and make it more of a reality, a 3D reality for us. So it shows the shaft going down the embalming workshop underground, and then the area above ground here for more treatment of the body, and then the burial of individuals right here. We have about 54 individuals came out of this tomb, of this shaft. This is how the shaft looked like when we cleaned it up. It was completely filled with sand and we had to clear it. And we went down using ropes. We didn't have those nice stairs that you see then when Kingdom of the Mummy. So this is our 3D documentation of K24 with pointing out where every tomb is. So we start with tomb 1 here, tomb 2, and this is huge. This is going to be a big thing that we're going to be working on in the very near future. Tomb 3, tomb 4, 5, and 6 is the big magnificent one that's 30 meters deep. This is how it shows the relationship between the stuff that Maspero excavated in 1899 and what we excavated in 2018, this one. So after 118 years, we just moved around to a little bit to the south. And this is how the top plan from our laser scan looks like. This burial chamber of Tadihor. We're going to look at it, and this is how Tadihor burial chamber looked like when we excavated. This is a 3D photographic documentation of the situation. Then her coffin, and very interestingly, you have this interesting section of Book of the Dead 72 when she meets Tekim, the demon that protects the last gate to heaven. And then if you cross, you get this interesting burial chamber of Yeput right here, Chanimit, and this is how it looked like when we discovered it with 2 decayed wooden coffins on the floor. these two interesting guys, Libyan descent for sure, Egyptianized Libyans who lived in Egypt and became priests of yet one of our new discoveries, the cult of a new serpent goddess, Neutrias. We didn't know anything about her, but before I get into Neutrias, we started with 3D documentation of our process of excavations. Everything is laser scanned and photogrammetry. This is that shows you phase 1 of our of the situation, phase 2 of the cleaning, and phase 2 of 3 of the cleaning of this burial chamber. So I will get into Neutrias because another interesting person that's connected to Neutrias is in this burial chamber right here, and is this person here in the middle. And she had the gilded silver mask on top of her face, and she was a priestess of Mut and Neutrias. That's very interesting because the connection between Mut and Neutrias goes back to Dynasty 90. The first time we have any indication of a goddess that is named Neutrias was in the bark station of the goddess Mut in Luxor Temple. We have Ramses II standing in front of her, of Mut, and reciting the names of Mut when she turns into a serpent. So he calls her you are becoming Weret Hekau, you're becoming Renenutit, you're becoming this, every serpent goddess, and Neutrias. And then we don't have anything else about Neutrias, just an epithet of Mut when she assumes a snake form. But that's it from Dynasty 90. And after that, everything just silent. In the Greco-Roman period, when this particular association with Mut appears in the Greco-Roman temples, it was the same thing, calling Mut, you becoming a serpent, you becoming Renenutit, Weret Hekau, Neutrias. But between that, it looks like in Dynasty 26, we have a priesthood for Neutrias, which means she has been elevated from just an epithet of Mut to becoming an independent goddess with her own chapel. And if 2 of her priests has this beautiful sarcophagi here, and one priestess had a gilded silver mask, that means it's a very rich temple. That is, the richness of this temple is reflected in the richness of the burials of the priesthood of this particular goddess. Do we have a temple or shrine for Neutrias somewhere in Saqqara? We might have a shrine for her somewhere in Saqqara. But the very interesting thing, I don't think Neutrias she was not only, I'm gonna run to show you something. Here, this is the bark station. And yes, this is another image of the text of Neutrias on the sarcophagus of Chanimid. This is her name right here. And then comes not just like here, she is not just a serpent. She is a lioness-headed serpent. And this is fantastic because you're not elevating Neutrias only to the position of becoming an independent goddess. No, you're connecting Neutrias to 2 of the most prominent forms of the goddesses in ancient Egypt, lioness and serpents. So felines in general, you have Bastet, you have your Mut as well, you have Sekhmet, and then if you put Neutrias with the lioness head, it means you're elevating this goddess into that status. And also the big serpent goddesses as well. That's Osiris, Isis, Weret Hekau, Renenutit. So Neutrias is not just an independent now. She is very big. She is on equal footing of the highest feline and serpent goddesses in Egypt. And I think Neutrias in Saqqara, she was not Mut in particular, but Sekhmet. And if you look at Sekhmet's connection and the felines' connections to Saqqara is huge. Sekhmet is one of the triad of Memphis, Petah, Sekhmet, and Nefertum. So you got Sekhmet in Saqqara in the Memphite area. You got the goddess in Abu Sir. There is a chapel for a goddess by the name Sekhmet Sahore. Sekhmet, who protects the Egyptians against the diseases that comes from the foreign lands. And that particular chapel had so many endowments, and people going all the time to visit Sekhmet Sahore in the temple of Sahore. That's starting the new kingdom, and it's very interesting. And I think Neutrias, on one of the statues in Brooklyn Museum from Dynasty 26, also in Saqqara, from Saqqara, it has a mention of her name, and I think this association between Neutrias and Sekhmet has been already cemented during Dynasty 26. So, sorry for this jump, but pretty much across the room where you have this gilded silver mask, you got this Ta Didi busted burial chamber and this beautiful photogrammetric model of the situation with Didi Busted's, her full name is Ta Didi Busted, but we went with Didi Busted with the documentary. Then you have this extra two kind of jars that you saw us doing the CT scanning, and we were sure that there is soft tissue in there, human tissue. That's very interesting ideas. So interesting thing is that our laser scanning with the photogrammetric models that we're creating, we can on the computer reconstruct everything as it was 2,600 years, and we can really make everybody appreciate the situation of these burial chambers before we cleaned everything up. So this pretty much how everything looks like K24 with all the chapel and Second Dynasty galleys. That's going to be a huge project for us. And the tombs of Maspero that he excavated in 1899. And with this image, I can finish that presentation. I'm sorry I'm speaking so fast because I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ramadan. That was amazing. I feel like I have really had a whistle-stop tour of that site. It's amazing, really, really great. Malak asked, what was the number of, it's not a quiz for you, what was the number on that jar that contained mummification liquid that needed to be put on at one day? Like
34.
That's what I said.
That's day 34.
Day 34, okay.
Yeah.
What are the sacred 7 oils?
You get those, in fact, those are the oils that is used in the opening of the mouth ritual and also used in the mummification. I'm running just to show you their text. So they were pretty much used in 2 different contexts, ritual contexts. One context in the embalming, and the other context in the opening of the mouth. So you could see them right here. Those are when you see this interesting plate, and you have the small holes in them to contain these oils here. One of them, of course, is that Hekinu oil, the Sechheb oil, and then the Sefet oil, the Neghanim oil, the Tawat oil, this is how it's pronounced, the Hat Ash oil, and Hat Shihinu oil. Those are pretty much the 7 ones that is used for embalming and the opening of the mouth. And why do they have to be at the head end of the coffin, and also in the late period in Dynasty 26 at the head end of, which means here behind this wall, or behind the head of the deceased, you have this wall, because even in the Middle Kingdom, they would put it behind the head of the deceased, because during the embalming and the opening of the mouth in particular, each oil would have to go to one opening of your face. You have 2 here and 2 here, that's 4, right? 2 here, that's 6, and the 7th is right here. So it makes sense. And those are imported oils. And that's why I'm saying the ritual purpose goes traveling between ritual spaces. In the embalming workshop, they will be used, and also before the entombment of the mummy, the ritual of the opening of the mouth will be performed, and then they have to touch all these 7 openings with those sacred 7 oils. And this is, of course, interesting to think of them. All of them are imported. We don't know all of where the plant base of all of them. And now after our project, we are sure that some of these oils we can know maybe exactly, we can decide what they are, and this is the golden opportunity that we're talking about.
So is there a vessel for each of those 7
Yes.
wheels left in the chamber? Wow, amazing.
Yes, yes. And in fact, very interesting, because even from earlier periods, proto-dynastic, when we have, we see this pattern of ritual disposition of these containers. They pretty much match the disposition of the text in relation to human body, because this is another thing. We didn't think about human body as reference of text placement in the tomb, in the coffin, in reality even. So one of the things that's very interesting in the proto-dynastic cemetery in Abydos, that when Matt Adams and his team discovering this galena and the eye paint ones, vessels, and they're very close to the head of the deceased.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very interesting. Even when, imagine this, these things have to go to the eye, and they put it right next to the head of the deceased. The text that has been recited during that particular ritual is always going behind the head of the deceased, either in the pyramid or inside a coffin. So it's very interesting that the Egyptians were very consistent when they know, okay, with the ritual object should be placed right next to a body part. The text that goes with the ritual object should be placed right close to that particular body part.
Okay. Were there deities associated with each of the 7 oils, like thinking about them being
there is,
the face?
I wouldn't say there is a deity connected with each of them, but there was a deity connected with the process of pressing oils, pressing and oil production. I remember Shesim or something like this.
And one of the questions I was going to ask, I noticed on the exit wall, the doorway looks a little bit like the shape of the top of a jed symbol. Is there anything in the jed symbol inside that?
I love this observation, because it's very interesting. It looks like not the jed in particular, but it's more of the word for gate or wall, the enib. So you could really see that in that particular one right here. Yes, it would be more of the representation of wall or gate.
Yeah.
And what is also very interesting is that right here, this is where the text about when Had opening the tomb, right here. But very interesting is that it's right in the middle of that lintel right here.
Yeah.
So exactly in the middle. So when you say when Had, the same text that talks about opening the tomb of King Titi in his pyramid is exactly the same position.
Yeah.
So right in the middle, on the act. And you're talking about Titi, the beginning of Dynasty 6, and Padinisit toward the end of Dynasty 26. Same exact positioning of the text. So it's very interesting.
I suppose it shows the emphasis that was there for the magical power of texts to create things and to activate energies.
That's true. And also it shows what is more important is the continuity of these traditions. So we're talking about almost 1600 years difference or even more, but they still have a tradition that is that strong, deeply rooted in terms of text and also positioning and also understanding. And this is what makes me always so fascinated about a certain society that can keep that textual tradition this long and keeps it alive, and even bringing it back with a new understanding of it.
Is there any evidence for texts being used but maybe inappropriately or not fitting context of ancient times?
There's so many times when you see a text that's not written in a good way, in an understandable way. They see somebody who did not really understood what they're copying. Because we have so many examples, but we have other text people from ancient Egypt who were very careful to write down in the middle of their running ritual text, saying Gim Ush, which literally means found, destroyed. So the paragraph that they're copying, they skipping it because they say, I found it destroyed.
Yeah.
So they were that careful in the copying to the point that, okay, don't hold it against me. It's not corrupt. It's not garbled. I know my text, but this part, this section here that I'm skipping, I found it destroyed. So that's a very interesting also thing to talk about, how they were really transmitting text and how text was traveling through space and time.
One of the other questions I wanted to ask you about, we spoke about it a little bit before we went on air, was those evidence for those giant water bugs that you found.
I don't know, do you have a photograph of it so you could show it to everybody? I don't have it here, so I don't know if everybody knows about this one, but I don't want to go to Facebook and
trying to find. I can find the image of it somewhere. I mean, I looked at what they look like in real life, and they look really terrifying.
They're horrible.
Yeah. And I think it was on. Let me just have a look here. So yeah, if you tell everyone a little bit about them, I'll get these pictures.
Okay. Let me get some other presentation where I have a photograph of them. So we have, in this embalming workshop, we have found those 6 bugs that they look like cockroaches, but they're not. They're more also looking like a palmetto bug, this water bug. And oh my God, just looking at anything.
There you go.
Oh, thank you. So this one you could point out because it's your screen. So the one on the upper left is inside the shaft leading down to the embalming workshop. You could see that right next to this bug, there is a red linen, and actually we found about 8 of them, 6 complete ones, and 2 are not so complete. They're broken, and we found them in different layers. There was about 5 centimeters of sand between the layers, which means they put there purposefully. And with each one, we have some potsherds, linen, sometimes red, sometimes white. But those interesting thing is that when I saw them, I started to think about them. We have, of course, consulted entomologists, and we got some pretty much 2 species that connected with these particular bugs. Lithecurus niloticus is the one for Egypt, and that's the one on the upper left. They look like a cockroach, but they're not. They're horrible. They're painful. They have a sting or bite. This is so painful. In fact, they're described as the water, the scorpion of fresh water. So any freshwater canal or river or anything, you see those bugs in there. And the fact that they've been described as scorpion means they have a painful sting. And also, from what I read about them, their poison, their venom is able to liquefy the inside of the prey. That would allow them, as you see in the bottom things, they would attack a fish or a turtle, for example. So, but when I saw them, of course, we had to document them and all these interesting things about them. We had a big laugh, but we started working on them. And the first thing that came to my mind was this vignette on the upper right corner from Book of the Dead, chapter 36. The early vignette, the early form of Book of the Dead, chapter 36 from the New Kingdom, it does not show this cockroach-like insect, but it shows actually a beetle. And then comes toward the late period, that beetle form of the vignette completely disappears, and you see this exact Lithocurus neolithicus being speared by the deceased. The text of chapter 36 of Book of the Dead talks about fighting or repelling bugs that feeds on the body of the deceased. So you could have this particular context of our cockroach-like insects or the Lithocurus neolithicus insect as an epitropaic ritual. A ritual to fight and repel those bugs that might feed on the body of the deceased. So, and it makes perfect sense to put it in an embalming context. But I have a completely different approach and a situation explanation of this one. In fact, this there was an association between this particular bug and the goddess Serket or Selket. Selket being this nice goddess with this what looks like a scorpion over in her head. She was one of 4 deities that protects the canopic jars. So I think this particular bug was the sacred insect of Selket. And especially if you have to put it with red linen and white linen, the 2 basic fabrics for mummy wrappings. So you put mummy wrapping linen right next to a sacred insect like this in a sacred shaft leading down to the embalming workshop. So in any way you slice it, either a apotropaic, according to this vignette, or a respect and a sacred burial of a sacred insects with sacred fabrics of mummification, both fits the context of an embalming workshop perfectly.
I was thinking if they're capable of liquefying your innards, you could maybe use them as little, doing your jobs of mummification, like liquefying the innards of a corpse.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. No, I don't think so. But it's more, the interesting part about this particular context is you start thinking about the ritual action, either to protect the body or to honor a goddess connected with the embalming.
Mm-hmm. Showing that now. Okay, let me have a look through some of the other questions. Alex says, the sign of a cat was a servant god in ancient Egypt, but not a god. Is that right?
The cat was not a god, yes.
Okay. So, he also said, was the cat the servant of the Memphis triad?
Sekhmet was a feline.
Yeah.
So a feline, that's an interesting term because those goddess could be a lioness and could be a cat as well. So, or even, you know, anything that is feline, that's the best thing I like to use, the best term I like to use, because they can assume different forms.
Is there an aspect as well of a kind of composite goddess of representing a united Egypt as well, with the vulture and the snake?
Yes, those are some of the symbols of royalty, and you know, serpent was very important. The goddess Wajid, and this is one of the very oldest goddesses from Egypt, even before the unification. She had her cult established in the Delta. So having the vulture and becoming the symbol of the South, and the serpent, the Wajid cobra, is the symbol of the North. So you're bringing 2 symbols to express the idea that Egypt is united. Is
that an idea that could be expressed through different deities if they take that form as well?
Sure. The point is that when you go to this class, you assume the same importance. You become you assume that status. So for Neutrias, for example, when they say Neutrias is a serpent, so you give her the glory of all these serpent goddesses, and she is in the same league, so to speak. And when you say, you push it further and you say she's not only a serpent, she is able to assume different forms. And let's say she is also a feline. And you think about felines, you got Sekhmet, you got Busted, you got Hathor, you got Mood. So you put her exactly in that league, so you make her really important.
One of the things I was reading about, I think it was an article from maybe National Geographic or maybe just from you, it was about the idea of placing a mask on a mummy. And I think I was reading that the term for mask was something like nefer hair. So it's like a beautiful face or like a perfect face kind of idea.
Yeah. I've written a post about this one because it's very interesting, because this is another very interesting thing to look at, is pretty much every object in the burial chamber has been placed in the burial chamber during a moment of ritual. So I was always saying, let's try to reconstruct this human action. I have a mummy that is finished, everything's ready, and you need to put it inside the tomb. The moment of entombment, what is happening? You have to bring everything inside the tomb, all the objects on the funerary equipment and everything, you put it in there. It's not just a moment of silence. This is a ritual action. So there is a recitation that happens in there. So that takes us to another chapter of the Book of the Dead, I think 151. And this is when this chapter is two parts. One part is about finalizing the embalming rituals. So we're closing up everything, okay? And the other part is about the entombment of this mummy and placing the mask, the nefer, over the face of the deceased. And it's been placed by an embalmer. And this mask could be anything, any material. And in fact, we have evidence of masking the dead, putting mask on the dead, even from the pre-dynastic, as Renée Friedman has shown us from Heracompolis, with all those pottery, masks made out of pottery. And so the idea of deceased need a mask, this is also a very old one, but the cultural manifestation of it and expression of it is different. So you got people would have a cartonnage mask, for example, that's gilded cartonnage. This is a simple one. And then people who would push it really far, kings, they do have metal one that's made of gold, like King Tutankhamun, or made of completely silver, like in Dynasty 22. And all of a sudden you got some gilded silver mask. It's the placing of this mask in any kind of mask is a ritual moment. There's text being recited during that action. And then comes the material of the mask. Is there any symbolism behind it? I speak of the gilded silver mask. It's very rare, but it also reminds us of the story of the heavenly cow, the destruction of humankind. When Re was really mad at humanities because he grew old. The text is describing Re, the sun god, when he grew old, his bones became silver. His flesh became gold. His hair becomes lapis lazuli and all these things. So he describes them. So pretty much says the final stages of this god, his body completely transformed. And when you provide a deceased with a gilded silver mask, what you're providing is a plate of silver that is the bones of this deceased, and then the gilding layer that is the flesh of this deceased. So it's one step toward the transformation into divinity, because mummification itself, you produce a mummy. If you look at mummification from the angle of, we have a production line going on. You got a person who goes in as human, And then all of a sudden, after the 70-day process and rituals and treatment of the body, what you're producing is an Osiris.
Mm.
You got so-and-so coming in as a disease, but so-and-so comes out as Osiris so-and-so.
Mm.
That transformation into the divinity happened during the 70-day process of mummification. You enforce that idea, but putting this gilded silver mask. So if you don't have the money for a gilded silver mask, the mummy right next to that priestess had a mask that is made of plaster with a very thin gold foil over it. So you get the two basic colors, the white and the yellow. So those are the two, pretty much the bones and the soul of the god. So it's interesting to look at masking as a ritual action and also looking at the symbolism of it.
And the person that placed the mask on the deceased would have a mask of Anubis as well.
Yes. According to the vignette of that particular chapter, 151, he would be wearing a mask.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's very interesting because also I've seen Dr. Price showed you guys that interesting ostracon of the priest, the masked priest underground. It's very interesting to look at it this way because he's playing Anubis.
Yeah. Is there any evidence for car or bar statues in those tombs?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's anything like this, but I have to look into it.
Okay, let's have a look at. Karen asks, can you tell us more about the Dynasty 2 networks of underground passages?
You know, I was expecting that question. I was hoping somebody would ask it because this is going to be a really interesting thing.
Yeah.
Dynasty 2, the kings of Dynasty 2, when they wanted to be buried in Saqqara, they built a very particular tomb that is pretty much a maze of underground tunnels, 9-meter deep, and you have the streets and just it goes in every direction. The first one of those this network is pretty much to the north of the causeway of Unas. It starts exactly almost toward the last third of the causeway, and it runs toward the south in so many directions. Every tunnel has side niches, and the second network starts exactly at the northern eastern corner of the pyramid of Unas. And they run south in so many directions. Even some of those niches, Unas built his pyramid on top of them. That's why the south eastern corner of the pyramid of Unas, you see there's a little bit of a depression on the ground because of that void underneath it. And this is what made the southern face of the pyramid of Unas collapses during Dynasty 19 and brings Khan Wasit to do the restoration again. And then the third network starts in the northern west corner of the pyramid of Unas and runs under the area where we know as the Gisr al-Mudir. You go to the first network that was at the causeway of Unas. It was excavated by Hanover University, and it was led by Gunther Dreyer was working at this time with them. They published it, and they produced fantastic material out of it. Every network, this network has 3 archaeological layers. The floor is made of this alabaster and basalt vessels from Dynasty 2, smashed completely and became a flooring material. And this is where they found those stamps and names of King Ni-Netcher of Dynasty 2. This is how we connected with King Ni-Netcher. Then the second archaeological layer was New Kingdom and late period material. So it was reused in the New Kingdom and it was reused in the late period for burials as well. And then comes the middle network is where I am working right now. And I haven't touched it, we haven't worked in it, but we are planning to start cleaning and documenting it. The third network is there. I think those three networks, I had the pleasure of talking to Gunter Dreyer about them. He visited me on the site and we had to discuss them. And he gave me an idea that's very brilliant. He says he thinks every king of Dynasty 2, when they're buried in Saqqara, they want a tomb that is pretty much a model of underground city. His own underground city as the god Osiris, or the god of the dead. There was no Osiris back then. And he says, every tunnel is a street. And the niches on the side is pretty much a house on that street. So that he was thinking that this is pretty much a city for the deceased king to rule as a king in afterlife. And now I'm thinking that the network that is in my concession and the one to the west a little bit, one of them has to be for Nebka and the other one has to be for Khasakhan, the last two kings of Dynasty 2. And I personally believe that those three networks are what has given Saqqara its name as Ras Tau, the underground city of the dead. And I believe those are three, those one. And in fact, if the word, you look at the word Ras Tau and how it was written, it's a line and then three loops. One loop right here, one loop right here, one loop right here. It's pretty much three underground cities underground because they're all turning and twisting like this. So it's very interesting about those second dynasty galleries, and I'm hoping at some point that we can produce a nice 3D model of all three at some point.
Campbell mentioned actually the other day on our talk, because I'm really interested in dream incubation, and he was talking about rooms dedicated to the god Bez at Saqqara, and someone speculating that potentially there were incubation chambers of some sort.
They could be, and it's very interesting also to look at the Bobastian area and the excavations that's led by Dr. Waziri right now, and what's happening, all those animal mummies and cat mummies, different felines. We don't know whether they're cats or not, but they're felines definitely. And
that in did you say Bubastis?
Bobastian, the area.
So that is Bastet's kind of.
Yes, because of the connection of the goddess, the cats, and the burials of the cats, and all these things. So Saqqara definitely has a very deep connection with the feline goddesses, and also you have the jackals and everything. But definitely animal worship and animal mummies has a place, a huge place in Saqqara, and it was a pilgrimage site for those goddess. And of course, you look now at the industry, where were the embalming workshops for all those animal mummies, and if there's incubation rooms or not. Everything is possible in Saqqara. I don't think Saqqara has been explored yet.
Campbell was talking specifically about rooms that are covered with images of Bez, the god Bez, and he was saying that they seemed to be like chambers that people would spend time in.
I'm not aware of this, but he might know much.
Yeah, he was saying that it was just an idea that someone had said to him, an archaeologist that was working on the site, and I found it interesting because I haven't heard anyone else say that. So
then we have to wait to see if we're going to find them.
With regard to, like, I've heard that people would go to Saqqara to buy mummified animals. So were there areas around Saqqara where people were breeding ibis, for example, to mummify?
Well, when I got into this embalming thing, as you see in the beginning of my talk, I am a person who likes to work on text and things like that. Mummification was not really my interest at all. But when I had to deal with a mummification workshop and work on this thing, I needed to have a different angle looking at embalming, and I started to think about embalming more of a business and establishments that would involve making profit along with performing rituals. And of course, if you have an establishment, you need suppliers for everything. Suppliers for your raw material that you're using, all these sacred oils, all the woods that you're going to use for the coffins, You're hiring so many people. You have administration of that establishment and the cemetery. You have contracts with people about the arrangements of their funerals. So you have archives for everything. And of course, I would not exclude the idea that there will be breeders of those sacred animals somehow. Those would be your suppliers, you know. So this is something I wouldn't say no, possibly.
How about the idea of corpse medicine? Was that evident in ancient Egypt? Like, I did some research about the use of bitumen, and I think it's the Arabic word for bitumen is mumia, and so that's where we get the word mummy. And bitumen was a medicine, had medicinal properties in ancient Egypt, and then you start seeing people use ground up mummies in medicine, but there seems to be a history of corpse medicine that predates even that. Is there any evidence of that in ancient Egypt that you know of?
No, I don't think I have evidence for this, but it's very interesting to look at how the history of study of mummies, how we look at mummies. And of course, as you just said, the word mumia is a Persian word that means black, and because of that use of this is another interesting. I don't want to call it bitumen because I like to say it's black resinous substance. We're not sure, but it is definitely a petroleum byproduct. It occurred in nature, they obtained it, and they have to use it, but we need to know exactly what it is. So we have to do residue analysis. As to in modern time, how they were, mummies were used, not in modern, in medieval time, how they were used in even early 17th, 19th, 18th century, that they were used for medicinal purposes. I have no idea. It doesn't make sense to me that the ancient Egyptians will really desecrate the mummies in order to use them to treat somebody else. So I don't think ancient Egyptians would have done that.
Okay. Swati asks, did animal mummification take 70 days as well, or would that have been like a quick fortnight job?
This you will have to ask Salima next time when you see her. She's going to be very soon with you guys. But I'm not sure how long animal mummies would be mummified.
So the 70 days is about the Sopdet rising on the horizon. Is that right?
This is one thing, because you always have to connect it with the rise of Osiris, the rebirth, and all these things. As I just mentioned, that you have, when a person goes into the mummification workshop, you have a human coming to you, her name is so-and-so. And after this ritual and a treatment of the body, you bringing Osiris so-and-so. So transformation makes sense that the 70, but we have to make sure, we have to also, I was asked the question about, what if somebody doesn't have the money to be mummified and have the 70-day process? The poor people are not going to be gods as well? That is a good question to ask.
Poor people.
Poor people have afterlife, and they can be Osirises as well. A different form of embalming. But what is so important, it's not the treatment itself that transforms the individual into a divinity. It is the text. The text recited is what it's the power of the word itself that makes this person into a god, into Osiris. So you recite that. That's why permatexts are important, because those are the texts that are able to transform the person into a divinity. Every other treatment is marginal. You can just bypass it. But having a person to do the recitation for you is what is so important. So a poor person can really afford having somebody to recite this text, and voila, you have your divine dead person.
Is there an idea perhaps that a poor person could like edge in on a rich person's burial and therefore get the benefits of that rich?
Yes, this happens a lot, that poor people would just come very close to very dominant structures in the cemetery, because this is in terms of you know, imagining the evolution of a landscape of a place, the planning of it. You always have a landmark in a space, and then it becomes this, you know, it has a, it's the magnetic power that this place has. It gravitates everybody toward it, and then they have to cluster. But this is when there is a control over the cemetery that is loosening up and not very strict, that can really keeps the layout of the cemetery neatly and organized. But once you have this power start to get loosened up a little bit, people gravitate toward dominant structures for so many reasons, because it's sacred, it's important, you need to have it be close to somebody.
So if you were on your last legs, you could like crawl into the cemetery and fall into a hole, and you'd be sorted for the afterlife, maybe.
And this is what we have seen really around the embalming workshop. There's so many holes around it, literally around it, so many holes, small ones that is pretty much shallow pits for people who could not afford to be buried inside this place. And this is a good indication for any archaeologist. When you have your landmark around it, there must be something else.
Yeah. So with Padanisit, I watched a lecture that you gave, and you were talking about the various roles that Padanisit had at the time, and there was he had a duty towards the royal mace head and
Yes.
the box of valuables and the royal linen. Do we know more about what those kind of jobs might have entailed?
Yes. Let me just, I don't have them on this presentation, but it's very interesting because he was the Hamnecher Ames, which the Ames is one of the mace heads of the king. So he was pretty much the priest of that ritual weapon of the king. And then he was in charge of the royal linen. Then, as you said, the box of valuable. Those are very interesting old kingdom titles.
Yeah.
Not after the Old Kingdom, you don't see them. You only see them with Padanisit as a group of titles, which means he was a person responsible for the royal wardrobe. And also Padanisit was the director of the royal palace, and he was in charge of the private quarters of the king. So a person very close to the king, and a person connected to royal regalia in particular. All this dressing rituals and everything, all the regalia of the kings are sacred objects. So they needed a priest. And this is pretty much his duty. But it's reflected in the composition of his text. As I said, if you allow me to share a screen again. Where am I? Can you guys see my screen or not?
No, let me have a look. There you go. Should be able to do it now.
Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. This was this one. Yeah. This part of the text right here.
Okay.
This is about royal regalia, all these interesting staffs of the king. The jam, the was staff, the apit staff, the flail, then you got the bows and arrows, you got the lasso, you got all those things that the king would have to use as weapons, and also his in some other text here, for example, you see them right here, lining up all those different staffs here with the names of every single one of them. Okay. And then even the Mekis, which is this document of authorship, the ownership. And then you have this different mace heads. And of course, you get the bows and the arrows, the lasso and everything. Those are the weapons and also royal regalias at the same time. The text that goes with presentation of every single one of those items goes in a column right here. So imagine Padanisit, when he is handing his king all these staffs, he has to recite those particular texts with every single item. You don't see, the first time we saw this particular group of texts was in the Pyramid of Queen Neat from Dynasty 6. So it's a later composition in the Old Kingdom, not an early one. It doesn't appear with Unas, doesn't appear with Titi, doesn't appear with Pippi first, doesn't appear with Pippi second. It only appears with Queen Neat at the end of Dynasty 6. Then this particular group of texts disappear. And they appear on the coffin of King Achtoy from the first intermediate period. Then they disappear. Then they appear in Dynasty 26 with this guy, Padinisit, who was a priest of the Amis, right here. And he was in charge, the great person of the Bezet box, the box of valuable. And he was the secretary and the person responsible for the royal linen. So those are very interesting titles. Old Kingdom, it goes with Old Kingdom presentations of ritual objects, the ritual weapons for the king. They come back with Padinisit. So it's very interesting to look at them, look at the job itself, the three positions, and look at the text that goes with the presentation of every royal weapon right here. Appears with Neat, disappear, goes in the first intermediate period, disappear, comes back with Padinisit.
Is there some evidence of who may have been responsible, or what group may have been responsible for reviving the older ideas in Egypt?
Yes. In fact, everybody's crediting Dynasty 26 for reviving these old ideas. In fact, well, archaism, if we're going to talk about it this way, which is bringing back older ideas, is a very recurrent phenomenon from ancient Egypt. So you see it in the Middle Kingdom, they're doing archaism. In the New Kingdom, you do archaism. But the first big splash of archaism that you want to see it the first time we notice it is from Dynasty 25, the Kushites, where the people who really started to bring back older ideas.
Wow, that's really interesting. So Kushites started it off. Yeah,
it started at least with when the Memphite theology, when the Kushites were saying that, okay, we have copied it from, salvaged it, the creation myth of Memphis, salvaged it from this leather-worn document, and we have copied it anew. That's an interesting thing. And then the biggest form of archaism in Dynasty 25 comes with Taharqa. Taharqa building his temple in Nubia using Memphite artists who made him copies of the scenes that is already in the temple, the funeral temple of Pippi II.
Wow!
So even that's very interesting. Dynasty 6 temple, the Memphite cemetery artists, they still have their master Bücher, the master books they use, catalogs they use for all these scenes, and then they kept it. Then, or at least they can copy it from the Pyramid of Pippi II, and then they go in Kawa and build the temple of Taharqa using the same exact scenes. And this is very interesting. There was a scene of a Libyan family coming into Egypt, and their names are written in the temple of Pippi II, and all of a sudden in the temple of Taharqa, you find the same Libyan family with the same names right there. So archaism, if we have to credit somebody, it should be the Kushites.
That's really interesting. So in Kush, were they living according to these older traditions then, and kind of keeping it alive there, and then when they took over, they developed it again in Egypt itself?
Well, we have to be also a little bit pragmatic in the thinking, because they were also pragmatic. So you have to imagine, yes, everybody wants to say they kept Egyptian tradition, they kept this, why not entertaining the other notion, which is those people were pragmatic and they were pretty much trying to legitimize their role to Egypt and making sure that they're offering the Egyptians something that they can digest.
Yeah.
You know, we are one of you guys. We believe in everything you believe in. And this is true because in the New Kingdom, the Egyptians had an interesting policy toward Nubia in particular, which is mostly about Egyptianizing this community, you know, introducing them to the cult of Amun-Re, making Amun-Re one of the great gods in Nubia. His domain is in Jabal Barkal, so making sure Amun-Re, the Egyptian religion, is not a foreign thing to the Nubian communities. It's part of it. Yes, there was a long process of Egyptianizing Nubia and the Egyptians making sure to spread Egyptian culture among the Nubians. But we also have to think maybe the Nubians, yes, they had the cult of Amun and they were worshippers, they're very, you know, devout worshippers of Amun. But at the same time, why not? They were playing politics, you know, making sure that we have something to offer the Egyptians. We can bring the glorious traditions of Egyptian art and even literature back. So we have to also think about one of the big tombs in Asasif. It shows this archaism very well. The copying of text and copying of scenes from the New Kingdom, copying scenes from the Old Kingdom as well, all with these Kushite officials in the Asasif cemetery. And of course, the Kermit text as well appearing in this Asasif cemetery. So different funeral literature appearing in this Kushite tombs as well. So I am one of the people who think that the Kushites have started this archaism phenomenon, not just Dynasty 26.
With regard to Neutrias, are there texts describing her qualities? Do we know much about her activities as a goddess?
Nothing. Before our excavations, before our discovery of the sarcophagus of Yeput, the sarcophagus of Chanimi, the coffin of that lady with the gilded silver mask, and I think there is a fourth person with a Neutrias title. The wooden coffin completely disintegrated, it's completely turned into dust, but the plaster inscription, I could see the sign of the circle sign for Newt, and I could see the Shay sign. So I think I have at least 3 confirmed readings of her name for priest and 1 possible reading. That's a 4 persons. I am now more and more every day thinking that the 6 burial chambers, all the individuals in there are actually priests. Tadihur, Tadi Debusted, and every person in there, possibly priests of Neutrias. Before that, we have no text, we have nothing. We have only her name in Dynasty 9, in the bark station of Mut, and that's it. Nothing that tells us exactly what she is. Now our new excavations and our discoveries with the multiple occurrences of her name and association with priesthood, now we're sure definitely there is a temple or a shrine for her. Now we're sure about how rich these temples could be because of the endowments and the revenue coming in. The richness of this place would have to be reflected on the richness of the burials of the priests itself. Then I have the third piece of information is that with this statue in the Brooklyn Museum, about another mention of Neutrias also from Saqqara, possibly connecting her to Sekhmet. So now we don't have text, only titles of her priests, but also on the sarcophagus of Yeput and Chanimit. The priest of Neutrias is also a priest of Amun. So he's a priest of Amun and a priest of Neutrias. So Neutrias, you go back to Mut in Dynasty 9. Dynasty 9, Mut is the consort of the god Amun-Re. Then you have 2 priests that they say the priests of Ammon and priest Neutrias. So Neutrias is replacing Mut as a consort of Ammon, possible. And then comes the third priestess, the lady with the gilded silver mask. She was a priestess of Mut and priestess of Neutrias. So you got Neutrias all of a sudden becomes in this group of Ammon and Mut, the Theban, but at the same time, you don't want to separate her from Sekhmet. So it looks like all of a sudden we have a very active priesthood and theologians for that particular goddess that pretty much made her connected with so many powerful goddesses in the area. I am hoping to find more of her priests around the area, because they can't be only 4 or 5 of her.
Is there, have you got any ideas about where the location of her temple may have been?
If we have a big temple, it could be Memphis, the city itself. If we're lucky, we would have a shrine in Saqqara. As I mentioned, there was a shrine for Sekhmet Sahore in the temple, in the funerary temple of Sahore in Abu Sir. So would we have, especially if Sekhmet Sahore, her job is a protective goddess and a healing goddess against all these foreign diseases, especially once during the Khamasine. So would we have a shrine for Neutrias somewhere around the embalming workshop or far away? No idea.
What are you hoping to find in Tomb 2?
Which one?
You
the
know,
second dynasty too?
Shaft, like the empty space, yeah. That you haven't excavated yet.
I haven't excavated yet, but I think those second dynasty tunnels were appropriated by the embalmers in this mummification workshop to use them as burial spaces. So I think there will be more of human remains and human mummies inside them.
Have you got any receipts that shows how much it costs to be mummified in a nice?
I wish. I'm hoping for an archive. I really do, because we need. It's very interesting because we have a lot of text material and papyri written mostly in abnormal hieratic about those archives, those contracts, and also some demotic contracts, of course. Contracts between the embalmers and individuals, either during their lifetime, they would have the contract for arrangement for the mummification, or after they die, the family will take care. And we have those interesting archives from a class of priests who were libation priests. Those were the Wahmu priests, and as Dunker van Hale likes to use the Greek terminology for them, the Kawakite priests. Those are the ones who their jobs from even the ancient, from the Old Kingdom on, their jobs was to make libation for the dead. So they come and they do the water or pour the water or things. And all of a sudden their job has evolved and they obtain a bigger job description. And the bigger job description is to do 2 things. Take over the job of making funeral arrangement and embalming arrangement for the person. They would have to buy the grave, they buy the coffin, they buy embalming substances, and arrange for the mummification treatment and the funeral. Of course, that's becoming their job. And then you would see the archives, some of the families from Thebes, for example, they leave the archives with all the contracts they had. My dream now is to find an archive like this somewhere in Saqqara around the mummification workshop. There's so much to be done around in this area. And let's say the last person who excavated this area was Maspero in January 1900. He left the south area to the pyramid of Unis and moved to the east in the mortuary temple of Unis, and excavated the the tomb of Padinit and the tomb of Hakamsaf. He finished by January 1902 and left the area. Then the French, when they came around to work in the complex of Unis, they were more interested in the pyramid, the mortuary temple, surveying the area, making sure they have good documentation. Before the French, there was Zaki Saad excavated Abun Taif Daht to the east, and that's it. Nobody was really interested in the area to the south of the pyramid of Unis at all, until we started our re-excavation of all the area that Maspero excavated in 1899, and then we have this. So there must be a lot of stuff lying around, and I'm hoping that we have things that is connected to this embalming workshop, or maybe something different.
Do you get an impression of how many corpses they might have had on the go at any one time, or would the workshop been used for one person?
We have a count of all the mummies and human remains from K24, the communal burial shaft in the middle of this mummification workshop. We have 54 mummies coming out of all 6 tombs of this shaft. 54. Big surprise, mostly female. Mostly, that's K24 is a female dominated shaft. It's a lot of female in there.
Do you think this relates particularly to the goddess being maybe a cult for women?
Not sure, but we have priests connected to her, priestesses connected to her. But the only observation, the solid observation that we have is that we have so many women in this shaft, more than men. Would there be another shaft for men somewhere? No idea.
Well, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. You're such a wealth of information. That was incredible. I feel highly educated by you this evening. It was really good.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you to everyone else for joining us as well. Have you got anything, Ramadan, have you got any projects coming up, or what are your next moves?
I was hoping to go back to Saqqara in November, and let's keep that hope going. But if not, we're going to go back in the spring of 2021. As it stands, Corona is just making all governments around the world coming up with new regulations and new rules abruptly, and all of a sudden you get new rules happening. So, but hoping that we can go in November or in the spring of 2021. We need to finish what we started. We need to start a new the cleaning around the embalming workshop.
It's brilliant. I really hope you get back to Cairo. I hope you get back to Egypt very soon.
Thank you.
Carry on with that work, and I look forward to seeing more of it. You're going to do another Kingdom of the Mummies series?
I don't know. Maybe we will. Maybe we will not. We have so much stuff to work on. Yeah. But I've enjoyed Kingdom of the Mummies so much. We have 35 hours of filming material, and I never wanted to do documentary. I never wanted to be a guy who comes on TV and all these things. But when the opportunity came, one of the big things I discussed with the production team from BBC Studios, and they're all very, very brilliant and talented people, I said, we're going to do something different. This is not, we have a material that we can tell stories in a completely different way. We need to show people how relevant archaeology is. We need to just make sure this stereotype of Hollywood kind of, treasure hunters. And yes, we are treasure hunters, but we don't hunt for objects. We hunt for information. If we have an object, we're very happy because it's a source of information for us.
Yeah, one of the loveliest bits of Kingdom of the Mummies is when you open up one of the sarcophagi and you see mummy for the first time, and your face when you see it, and you feel like an emotional connection. Because I do think like it's a really unusual thing to do, to crack open that place where a dead person has been laid after all of that time, and there's an emotional element to that as well.
It's huge because first of all, you have in your mind at this point is, what is death, and what is your approach to death, and how do you perceive death? So it is something that is huge for you, and the impact is just overwhelming. You shake it up a little bit, but all of a sudden you start to think about, you are about this individual. You want to learn more about this individual, and how are you going to treat this body? And if it is a source of information for you, then comes the ethical code of how you approach it, how you handle it, how you deal with it. It's not an easy moment, really. You're not desensitized. You still have so many feelings. And then you get this overwhelming feeling of, this is somebody that me personally, you relate to. You're connected to it somehow. So all of a sudden you develop this connection between you and the person. And one of the things that I said also in Kingdom of the Mummies, and I was very, very true about saying what I feel, is that we are making the hopes of those individuals come true. We're making their dreams come true. They every single one of them, they always wanted their names to live forever. And this is what the Egyptians always wanted to have. Immortality for them is by remembering their names. And I said, this is what we're doing. We're making their names, we're resurrecting their names again for them, and their names live forever. And at the same time, we use them to study the society at large, all of it. You know, those are examples of this society. So when I look at Chanimit and Yiput and talk about their Libyan origins, there might be 6th or 7th generation Libyan immigrants in Egypt. So I take them as an example. They portray the Egyptian society to me, and the demographic composition of that, and how multi-ethnic society Egypt was during the 7th century BC. So this is the kind of thing that we use. We look at these individuals as solid evidence of the ancient societies. And this is the kind of respect that we're showing them, you know. So when you look at their mummies, you have all these things running in your head. So you get really overwhelmed with this, so many feelings you have. So you turn speechless at some point until you collect your train of thought and you go back and say something.
I read about this DNA ancestry scheme that correlates DNA evidence collected from archaeological sites, so that you can see where you fit into the whole situation. Because like you say, that was a very multicultural society, and ancient world was very multicultural actually, and those big city states, they had people from all over the place in them quite often. So
that's true.
It's useful. I've always thought that everyone should have a DNA ancestry like kit given to them at birth, so they kind of get an opportunity at least to know about their true history.
Egypt, as you just mentioned, at this time, even Saqqara, there is some burials, huge burials for individuals who were Greeks, because there were so many Greeks in Egypt. In fact, Psamtik was that tomb right next to Polynices, and Psamtik, he was the father of Polynices. Psamtik was the commander of the Libyan mercenaries in the Egyptian army, and there were Greek mercenaries in the Egyptian army. There were Greek merchants living in Neutrias in the Delta. There were Phoenicians living in Egypt. There were Aramaics living in the south. So Egypt was pretty much, you got all those immigrant communities living in Egypt. And this is what makes it so interesting to look at Egypt as the old somebody says, the melting pot of the cultures and everything, even in antiquity. You get this different people, and for Egyptians in modern time, before the 1952 revolution, Egyptian society was pretty much, there was a lot of French living in Egypt, a lot of Italians. There were a lot of Greeks living in Egypt, in Alexandria in particular. So even in modern time, Egyptians were very used to see foreigners living in the same community, and there were always this interaction between them. And this is a situation I imagine for Dynasty 26. It's really, really multicultural society, but there is one unifying culture for all of them that's called Egyptian culture. But you have your different communities living, maintaining their own culture and identity, but at the same time integrated in that big one.
Yeah, it's something to aim for in the future, I think.
Something to correct the political rhetoric against immigration in the West or in everywhere else. It's just, and this is what I said about trying to make archaeology relevant is the job of the archaeologist, to find the questions and to find the dialogue, to find the approach and to find the message. If you don't have the message for what you're doing, why doing it? If you always come around, hey, we discovered this, we discovered this, we discovered this. What are we going to do with it? Okay, you need your message. Archaeologist has the job of making our field relevant. And you're not making it relevant unless you find the right research question, unless you adopt the right research approach, unless you cross-disciplinary, get out of your archaeology, go somewhere else, find answers to your questions, unless you find a message that resonates with people and relate what you discovered and the stories you're telling to modern life. And I even like that, I told them while I was filming, I am so lucky because these two Libyan immigrants, I can talk about them within the context of this huge political debates in the US, in Europe, and even in the Middle East about influx and movements of people across borders, leaving this place, going somewhere else, whatever happening against immigrants in the US and putting numbers, and we don't want Europe, no, we don't want this, we don't want. A society is not strong unless it allows a number of different ethnicity into its borders, because you're bringing new bloods, new idea, new group of people that can give you a different look at things.
What's amazing, isn't it, is it's so ironic that ancient Egypt was so multicultural, and yet it has the most recognizable, cohesive culture of any ancient civilization.
Exactly. And I said, guys, if you like ancient Egypt so much and you think ancient Egypt was so fascinating, let's sit down and understand ancient Egypt right. Ancient Egypt functioned because of that amount of religious tolerance. For example, you have all these gods and goddesses, but you never heard about those guys fighting those guys because this religion is correct and this religion is wrong. No. Ancient Egyptian was pretty much a place where you can worship anything. Okay, any god you can worship, but at the same time, you don't have prejudice against the other groups that worship the different gods. In fact, there were always attempts to bring all these gods together. Neutrias, for example, they don't want Neutrias alone. They wanted Neutrias with Sekhmet, they wanted Neutrias with Mut, they wanted Neutrias with every feline goddess. So how tolerant this is. It is so accepting. And that's the one thing. And I say, big problem for archaeologists, Egyptologists, and archaeologists in general is how we make our message really relevant. That's the point.
Well, that is a great point to end it on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ramadan. That was great.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you to everyone for coming. That was like really full-on intense, excellent, thorough talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, for organising it. And thank you.
You're welcome. And what's our next one? Our next one, well, tomorrow we're actually talking about the evolution of the spacesuit with Dallas Campbell. But the next Egypt one is Mervat Nasser. I don't know, do you know Mervat, Ramadan?
I didn't have the pleasure of meeting her, really.
She's incredible, and she has built a retreat center, a sanctuary on Hermetic principles called New Hermopolis on the site of original Hermopolis. And yeah, she's great. So yeah, you can listen to this again, Valerie. You can listen to this on YouTube. It probably will take me several hours to upload our 2 hours and 6 minutes of chatting though. So thanks again, Ramadan. I hope you
pleasure. Thanks for everybody for staying.
Yeah, that was good. See you later, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.